Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy, the Hip Hop Lobbyist. And in today's video, I'll be breaking down early voting turnouts in Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. Now, as you paid attention in the last video or even the media's narrative of black men voting against Kamala Harris and voting for Donald Trump, I really want to not dispel that rumor, but at least bring some actionable data to that. And really, I feel that analyzing the voter turnout data will help you not only understand what's happening this election cycle, but be better prepared for whatever results may actually come on election night. Now, I'll be honest. My last video, I think we had 41 subscribers of the channel before that. The last video, we ended up getting 71 subs off that one video, which ended up pushing us over 100 subs. And I want to thank you for joining the community, first off. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead, tap the button, go ahead and subscribe, tap in. I do feel that the last video was only the beginning of where this channel and this page will grow. So thank you. But more than anything, let's jump into the numbers. And we'll first start in my state, the free state of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis and things of that nature. And as you know, we have roughly 14.9 million voters in Florida. Now, you may not be able to see that behind my caption there. Behind my camera, just realize it. So let me actually pull it up here. Yes, let's just pull up of the 14 million people in the state of Florida. Well, 23 million people in the state of Florida, but the roughly 14 million people that are registered to vote, we have roughly 4.3 million people, 29% of people who have actually cast a ballot. And that's very good. I mean, what ends up happening is, again, you have people who early vote, Amazon shoppers, Temu shoppers. They're not really worried about, any consequences. They want to wait 2 weeks or wait 3 weeks for the results. Let's get it out the way. Done. I'm on to the next thing. I'll find out. Like, whatever. Then the other folks like me who want to wake up on election day and have basically the shoes in the closet that you buy from the store. You may not be wearing an outfit, but you're going to have them, right? So those are two different kind of people. And what you have here, the 29% of people, they're early voters, they're Amazon shoppers. It's probably why Jeff Bezos didn't endorse. Either way, or didn't have the Washington Post endorse. But let's look at the turnout by political party, individual demographics here, political party description. And as you'll see, you may not know, there are more than Democrats and Republicans overall. So this is the entire layout of the entire state of Florida. The 5 million Republicans, 4 million Democrats, 4 million MPAs, and MPAs may really decide this election. But let's look at people who've actually cast a ballot so far, these 4.3 million people. And this is as of October 28th, 2024. So just in case, we're looking at more active data than anything that we can really get a good inference on what's happening in the state. So as we can see here, we have roughly 44% of the election vote or the electoral voting block being Republicans. They have roughly a 400,000, close to 500,000 voting advantage over Democrats right now. And the MPA, they're coming in strong, roughly 19% to the Democrats, 33% of 800,000 votes. And you can really round these other parties up. Registered independent, MPA, to me, they're the same thing, but whatever, right? Libertarian, other conservative, constitutional, you can lump those all into, let's say, MPA. So we have roughly 900,000 MPA voters that have cast a ballot, which will make it roughly 20%. So there's a good balance, and some could say, of turnout among Republicans that have turned out. Actually, let's look at all voters that have turned out before we try to break it down individually. But out of those, I need some genders, don't I? I need ethnicities, broad ethnicities, and I need genders, because we need to know the breakdown. And let's start at genders. 54% of the electorate have been women, females, 45%, roughly 46% men. So that's typically on average or where we would expect things. But out of that, the ethnic breakdowns, we have people of European descent at 58% of the entire electorate, 770,000 plus Hispanic, Portuguese descent people, and likely Americans, right around 450,000, a little above there, but also the unknowns, others, and East Asians. Don't mean to round them all together, no disrespect. Let me actually keep the unknowns and others there. They're 11% of the voting block, while the East Asian, South Asian, 70,000 votes per se. But this is the makeup of where the electorate is so far. let's look at black voters because we're focused on black male voters overall. Now, the last video we broke down and understood that when it comes to black male voters, they typically vote historically around 37%, right? And if we're anywhere above 37% on average, then we're doing good. Now, last election, it could be 38, but we're accounting for at least the last 4 presidential elections since Barack Obama was president, all the way until his re-election, Trump's election, the Biden election, and now today's current election cycle, right? So that's the 37% we base it off of, saying, hey, on average, this is what we expect. So anything above that means that we're overperforming. And something interesting here that we can see amongst black men in Florida is that they're voting at almost 40%. That's smidgen. That maybe an extra 100 votes would knock that up to 40% of people that have actually cast a ballot. So out of the 4 million people that have voted, the 27%, the 450,000 people being black voters in the state that have cast a ballot, we're looking at roughly 40% of those being men, which is very commendable. I give a hand to my brothers out here in these streets who are actually going to cast some ballots because they're different. Actually, let's look at ages. I think age would be important for the men that are voting here. Let's look at men specifically. And we're looking at L2 voter mapping data. If I didn't say that this video, I know I said it the last one. L2 is one of the more respected voter data mapping services, and they provide early voting mapping data for you for campaigns and operatives to have, at least, understand what votes are still out there to go get, right? So out of the entire electorate of black voters, black men voters, we see that a lot of it is over 55. You have roughly, that's a solid 60%, over 50, over 55, and then you have more dwindling numbers as you get to 18 and 39, right? And I have a theory on that we'll discuss later as we get into this. But as we look at the men, let's look at the political parties, right, in the state of Florida. And this breakdown basically shows you that less than 10,000 black Republican men have cast a ballot so far. 77% of those men being Democrats at 140,000. The NPAs, roughly, I would say you add all these together, you're at roughly 30,000, a little above 30,000 there, right? And the best thing, really over 30,000. Either way, the best thing to really look at is the fact that even if a lot of these black Republican men were voting for Donald Trump, which I believe they are, there are going to be some deflectors, right? So out of that 9,789, I would say roughly 700 of those men, could be 1,000. Let's say 1,000 to be frank, right? 1,000 of those men went in and they voted against the party because they have daughters, right? They have maybe 3 or 4 daughters. They're looking at, I may disagree with her politically, but just like Obama, I need to see someone of color in that position to actually do something. I think that'll be powerful because even though I'll be raising the next Candace Owens, we'll base a position on this, but I want her to be inspired by someone who looks like her. And I think that's a very powerful narrative. At the same time, I would look at the 140,000 men and say, out of this 140,000 Democratic men, let's say 40,000 of them broke off and said, we're not voting with the party. We're voting with Trump. We believe in Trump for what it is. That gives them, and let's throw in an extra just to even it all out. Let's give them 55,000, right? 60,000 votes of black men who hypothetically may have voted against Kamala Harris. Even if you gave them the 60,000, right, of those votes in the base of 9,000, to be honest, they're still being outpaced by Democrats, right? By the Democratic black men. And that's why I didn't believe in the narrative in situations like this, because it's like, even if they had those base of Republicans that still show up, there's still not going to be enough deflectors from the party and other factions to say, black men are overwhelmingly voting for Donald Trump. But here's something interesting I did see in the numbers as well. That's really for Republican men, really not even here. Let me get it out of the age piece because you'll see a lot of older gentlemen. But when we look at the black Republican men, that small minority group of 10,000 men who've already cast a ballot out of 23 million people in the state of Florida, for some odd reason, these brothers are outperforming black women at 56%. And honestly, they're almost doubling 20% at least what the average black man number turnout is like for voting. So that to me is really astonishing because I want to know, in these areas of Florida, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, where you see this cluster of 10,000 black people, essentially black Republicans, this is not alarming to me, but it's eye-opening because it really lets me kind of think and know, okay, what is it about these 9,000, 10,000 black men in Florida that makes them want to vote more than other, not only, let's look at this, not only other the lineages of people or ethnic groups, but just it breaks the mold. It's almost that, what do you have to prove? But they're proving it by actually voting, and it's not scary, but it's eye-opening to say, you know what, these brothers have found something to vote in. But I don't know if it's just Donald Trump, right? There's something I looked at that could kind of explain it, but I was really lost in it. I looked at educational levels. Then I also looked at income levels. Then I also looked at other things, from occupations to entrepreneurial spirits to how much they give financially and wealth, right? I couldn't find anything in the data that was astronomically different besides home ownership, right? And that to me is, I'll pull up a lifestyle number here, and I don't know if I checked Florida before I loaded this up, but property characteristics, what I'm seeing is a lot of these brothers, 64% here, well, that's all black Republicans, right? Right. Black men, got to correct myself here. Let's go back down to the numbers. 65%, nothing really changed here. 65% roughly are in residential homes. With apartment group living, I'll be honest, this is most likely, I would assume, a lot of elder senior citizens, right? Out of that group. I wouldn't really assume that a lot of, well, depending on age. But for that voting block, I would assume that, yes, 45% of those, 46 roughly, older. They could be in assisted living facility. They could be in assisted living facilities or nursing homes or things of that nature, rather than, or downsized, to be honest, rather than living in bigger homes. So I looked at that. I'm like, you know what? Is home ownership a thing? And as a homeowner, I would honestly say that, yes, I pay more attention to the elections on what property taxes are out there, what benefits are out there, what really would impact, I would say realistically, where my tax dollars are going between schools, roads, police, public safety, a little bit of everything. So I'm more inclined to pay attention to these things. But then at the same time, I didn't see that these 10,000 black Republicans in Florida would have more home ownership or more whatever than the average person. So by the numbers, no, they don't own more homes, right? But for some odd reason, out of these less than 10,000 black men out of the 23 million black people or 23 million people in the state of Florida, that for some odd reason, they own homes close to 66% compared to maybe some others. So we're still looking at black men who've cast ballots already. Let's switch it over to Republicans and see if this theory may hold true, right? I mean, to Democrats, and see if the theory holds true, all right? And these are of Democrats that have voted. This isn't just every Democrat. This is people who've actually cast a ballot as of now. And what we have here is black male Democrats are voting maybe a percentage point lower, right? 64%. Cool. So there could be something there. I'm not sure, but I'm not stuck on it because there's nothing that jumped out to me that said, you know what, hey, yeah, these brothers that are older or have homes or whatever are voting more. But I did find it kind of astonishing that in Florida, that those 10,000 black men that voted have voted higher than any other ethnicity in the state of Florida, right? And let's look at it just comparatively. People cast ballots, broad ethnic groups. Let's go through it. East and South Asian. Let's look. Residentially, 73% property owners. That's interesting. Where's the gender breakdown here? That's what I'm really looking for. 39%, right, to 60% of women. So that's interesting, right? European, comparatively. 40%. Black men who are Republicans in Florida are voting almost 19 points higher than white men in Florida, which is interesting, right? Hispanics and Portuguese. And I don't mean to say it that way. I'm just using the broad ethnic category as the groupings are here. 39, 40%, right? We looked at black men earlier. Let's reemphasize it just to let us know. 37%, right? Collectively. And other unknown will add together. Let's see where we are. I was about to say 4% was off. 40%, right? So we have 40% there. So there's something happening in Florida waters. In that Florida water that is making black Republican men, those 10,000 that are in that small, minute box of Florida, say, you know what, I'm going to outpace everybody. But that's just Florida. Good turnout so far. I will honestly say Florida's going to be red. It used to be a good battleground state, a nice purple state. But the influx of Republicans that have moved to Florida from other states, from other places, it's really kind of thrown off, I would say, the balance here. But at the same time, I feel a lot of those people that were in Florida have moved to Georgia and North Carolina and other places, Houston in general, that have made it more diverse and made those states more competitive. But I don't want to have that conversation in this video. That's something else. So let's go to good state of Georgia, Wakanda forever. Tapping in, looking at early voting numbers there. Let me know your thoughts on the Florida turnout. I think down 400,000 votes in the state is not necessarily a thing to say, hey, don't vote. It's still come out and vote. The issue is you have to be realistic on what to expect, right? I don't want to blindside anybody with any information. I don't know what's going to happen on election night. We're all going to be finding out at the same time. However, I don't want us to be blindsided as communities on these false narratives of who to blame, because that's really what's happening now. Now, these are people who have voted as of October 29th. These are fresh live data coming out of Atlanta in the great state of Georgia. And what we have are roughly 2.9 million people, 40% really, of people who have cast a ballot, of registered voters who have cast a ballot in the state of Georgia. Now, again, that doesn't leave a lot for election day, right? If almost half of your electorate has voted in early voting absentee, that means that election day isn't going to be that exciting. Competitively, I'll tell you this. Let me switch this over. Competitively, what this means is when early voting ends on Sunday night, the Republicans across the country, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. When early voting closes Sunday night, the Republicans across the country are going to know how many votes they need on election night. And they're going to have every outreach method, text message, emails, whatever, straight going and talking to the same facts of saying, hey, this is what we need. The Democrats have spent all their money, all their resources on turning out the vote in these areas. And guess what? We know that they have no more votes left to get. Or we know that they only have maybe 12 to 15% of votes left to get. I need you all to show up like we never done before to save our country. Now's the time. And I'm saying it that way because honestly, what happens is you need to understand Republicans, like most other folks, are Foot Locker, go to the mall, go to Macy's, JCPenney. I'm going to buy it, fill my whole shopping cart up on Black Friday shoppers. I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. to go get it. And guess what? I don't care if I miss Thanksgiving dinner. The leftovers are going to be here. But I'm going to have physically that TV, those shoes, those clothes, and all the Christmas gifts I need on Black Friday because guess what? I'm an election day shopper. That's what it is, right? They're going to show up on election day, and they're going to know how many votes they need. They know that it's going to be a doorbuster sale at the polls. And that is exactly why some people could say early voting and absentee voting are killing the democratic process. Not even the democratic process, it's killing the Democrats in the process. Because even now, you have more Republicans who are voting early to say, hey, we want to be competitive enough with you to let you know we're not leaving nothing on the field on election night. And if you didn't know that, I'm going to let you know it right now. The problem With the problem with the process and the problem with the system is we've made it too fucking convenient to vote. Simple. You made it so convenient that people now know, instead of saying, hey, we're going to find out on election day. No. Keep on voting. Let us know what plays you need to run. I'm telling you, if you told Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and Michael Jordan and LeBron James exactly what the fucking plays you were running in the fourth quarter, guess what? They're going to beat your ass. Point blank and period. I need some water. Got a little worked up there, but it's real. If you give an experienced person, I didn't even cry for that. I'm crying because I choked, bitch. Either way, again, if you give an experienced person, an experienced coach, an experienced team, exactly what they need to win in the fourth quarter, after you giving your plan for black men to vote, after we sit here and watch the ILA cripple the entire America by having a protest for 2 whole days, if you want to give them your game plan for the fourth quarter, keep pushing early and absentee voters, right? Because even though it does enough in the 3 different layers of an election, what happens is there's no more voters on election night. Because you push early vote, avoid the long lines, send your absentee in, let's make it convenient, drop it in a Dropbox. They set a damn Dropbox on fire in Washington, right? You think that won't add to the narrative? They're looking for the Volvo, right? That has nothing to do with this. You can talk about Puerto Rican voters who are offended by the comments from the other side right now. I get it completely. But when you get down to the brass tacks of it, the issue is you're giving too much away in early voting. But that's it. Let's get back to the numbers. So we had to change studios. Let's get back to it. As I stated earlier, 40% of your electorate already coming out to vote. It's going to change and sway some things. So we'll see how it comes out on election day, right? But of those people that have cast a ballot in the state of Georgia, those 2.9 million who voted as of October 29th, 2024, you see the turnout numbers here. Females voters are up 55% to 44% of males. By ethical grouping, East and South Asian residents make up 2.4%, like the African American, 845,000, Hispanic, 1.2, European, 1.6, and unknown, 206,000. Again, that data is based on people who maybe classify their ethnicity. But by party, breaking it down, Democrats are up roughly 10,000 votes in Georgia. And as you know, Georgia is a major swing state, and Georgia and North Carolina, including this video, could help determine the election. And it's going to be a very telling close race. As you can see, just by party off this data, early voting numbers show that Georgia Democrats are up by roughly 10,000 votes, and a little less than 10,000. But that could be swayed by MPAs. And the MPAs, non-party associated residents who've cast a ballot, they could sway either way. They could be going towards Trump, going towards Kamala Harris. Really, we're unsure exactly how they'll be voting, because they're more issue-based voters, people who just aren't buying the major Democratic issues that end up getting pushed, right? So a part of that ends up being, okay, how do you talk to those voters? How do you reach out to them when you're talking about the hot button issues, whether it's inflation, abortion, in Florida, recreational marijuana rights, recreational marijuana laws and rights, and just an overall breakdown of what could really be important for those block of voters. But when we're looking at black voters, black male voters, let's see how they break down for this aspect of people who voted as well. So likely African American, you have here in Georgia, again, just like Florida, not 39%, but it's 38%, which is above the 37% real benchmark that we allocated or really said in the last video, right? So black men in Georgia are voting more through early voting stats through Tuesday, a week before the election. But of those, you have 800,000 Democrats voting to 29,000 Black Republicans. And I'm not understanding why the MPAs aren't showing up here. That's between L2. I don't, for this video, won't dive deeper into that, but for here, what we'll really focus on is the men. 38% who are overperforming. Of those, is Democrat to Republican. And still kind of the same method we did in Florida to say, okay, of whatever this number is, let's look at it. Of this 14,000, let's say roughly 2,000 deflected, right? And they voted again because they voted for Kamala Harris for president because they have daughters. They want to see, even though they're raising a more conservative family and household, they want to see someone of their skin color or their cultural being in that position. Not just because Kamala Harris is multicultural or biracial, however people want to be. You hear it all, right? I don't even want to discuss that in this video because the people questioning her ethnicity, I just don't understand, right? But that's not this video, this conversation. We're focusing on Black male voters. But of the Black male voters who've shown up, you've seen that roughly 14,000 of these voters have actually cast a ballot to 307,000 Black men. But in this case, even though it's a close race, it could really make a difference in some aspects. Those 100,000 voters that could deflect from the Democrats and go to the Republicans could still be outweighed by white conservative and white liberal women who would outpace this 100,000 by their voting patterns. And we'll take a look at that briefly, all right? So let's say honestly looking at it, of roughly 500,000 Republican white women, essentially, if they deflected at the same rate Black men with daughters voted against Trump and Democrats that voted against Kamala Harris voting for Trump, they would be outweighed by the 100,000 potential white women, Republicans, who would be outweighed. Now, what's interesting here, as you see, the MPA European voters showed up on the data, but they didn't show up for Black voters. I think that's another conversation for another day to understand why people vote the way they do. But going back to Black and Republicans, one thing I didn't see, that's kind of crazy. It's kind of skewing this video some. L2, we need to have a conversation about that. We'll get back to it. Because in Florida, we had MPA Black voters who cast ballots. So we have 14,000 men in Georgia. And if you add that up to the less than 10,000 men in Florida, you have approximately 25,000 Black men without skewing who voted against Kamala Harris. Even if you added those extra 200,000 or 300,000 in, again, they'll still be outweighed by the impact that other ethnicities, female voters, would have on that shift. That's just the honest reality of it. It would have to come down to the margins, but the margins are telling folks that there's going to be a good percentage of those women who just don't want Trump in office either, just for what it is. So breaking that down from there, we really see that, actually, I might edit this part up. but looking at these 14,000 black male Republicans who've already cast a ballot in Georgia, are they voting in Georgia more than they're voting in Florida? No, but it's close. You see that out of the 29,000, roughly 30,000 to 29,000 voters who cast a ballot already this election, they're 49%. There's something, even though this is even a sample still of 25, 30,000 Republican black men, to me, it still shows that there is to me, it shows that there's something that makes them want to vote more on average than Democratic black men and some MPAs. Now, hopefully, we'll look at another state most likely to see how that plays out. But in Georgia, from a residential standpoint, we see that keeping everything consistent, ceteris paribus, 77% roughly of these voters live or own residential property, live in or own, and that will be based on the homestead. So, goodness. So we see out of 14,000 of those voters, black Republican voters, they're homeowners, 76%. There's nothing I can see, again, going through some of this data, looking at occupational, are they a business owner, self-employed, how many of them have this data pulled in? You can't tell me that the 301 self-employed Democrats, whatever narrative, by the numbers, clearly, by occupation, clearly here we can see that there's nothing that's going to give Republicans an advantage to say, hey, I'm self-employed. We have more self-employed people per whatever than Democrats to say, hey, yeah, this is why I'm a Republican. So that can't be a narrative. How likely are they to be in the union? Like 50%, like 50, no, 270 of people who cast ballots. So they could be, in some aspects, deflecting from the party. They could be some, maybe not daughters, but you never know. Let's look at some of the other occupational groups here. That's a good chunk, but you see professional, technical, blue collar, administrative, managerial, some educators, homemakers, medical professionals, retired, military. Military always makes sense on both sides of the aisle, because you'll see that a lot of military Democrats will vote Republican only because of the benefits. But if you put your life on the line, of course, I'm gonna vote for the president that wants to give the veterans the most benefits, right? Religious. These end up being your pastors and the leaders of the congregation were black Republicans who most likely lead Democratic congregations. Nobody talks about that, right? Even for the members that they bring into their church and the guests, they can be preaching Democrat all day, but 44 of them in Georgia are at least Republican. And because of the data and how sensitive information is, I'm not going to go deeper than that for what it needs to be, right? There's no need for me to see who they are because there's no beneficial interest unless I'm reaching out to pastors to say, hey, I'm having a community event and in a tight race, and I got to see where your goals are. But in the same token, there are pastors who are saying, hey, yeah, I could be that way for whatever reasons that benefit my congregation, my community. However, they still are the ones who will be like the Obamacans or the Black Republicans with daughters who are going to vote against the grain, right? So that's something we always have to take into perspective with these voters when we look at Black Republican voters, Black males who go against the grain, essentially, of what most Democrats think is good policy. So let's own a lot of property. Let's look at the Democrats. We have not done that. These MPAs are throwing me off. Pause. Of 307,000 Black men in Georgia who have voted, 69% of them are homeowners. They own some property. So they have a reason to vote. One thing I realized I didn't look at is overall, let's look at people who have a lower voter frequency, right? I think you need a good comparison to say, okay, people who may have voted in, let's say, the first time voting, maybe 2 or 3 of the last elections, right? Let's see what the numbers tell us. From a residential standpoint, 45% homeowners, 40% apartments. Let's compare this age-wise for the apartments and seniors, because there may be a lot of seniors in these apartments, a lot of seniors voting for the first time, saying, you know what, I want to do it before I possibly go out, right? I want to vote for a Black woman, right? Of those voters by age, they end up being your voting block in apartments, the 20, 29, 34, 35, 30. This end up being the block that you end up meeting, that 20 to 39 voting block that's living in apartments. So in the comments, when I saw that, hey, I'm getting a lot of text message, I'm getting a lot of mail, you're getting a lot of mail because they know that you're in apartments. You feel me? So when Desi Banks and everyone's talking about, okay, how do I get to those people? We know your living status, but how can I relate my message? Let me switch over here. The issue ends up being, how do I flip my message into this voting base, right? If I have, actually, I do need it. Let me go back. Tripping. If I need voters, young voters, between 18 to 39 to show up to vote, what's my messaging to them when they're looking up to Desi Banks, Drewski, Kai Cenat, and everyone else? That has to be the messaging that they're not hearing. Because some of these people, let's say, just look about college education, (5% of them, 6% of them completed high school likely. 2% of them attended but didn't likely compete college. That's 7-8%, right? College completed, 6%, some unknown, right? But even on this basis of this data, for what is known, if these trends continue through the rest, then what we're seeing is that you need a messaging that relates to this 5%, these 18,000 completed. Let's look at it. Let's not get too far into the weeds, but let's look at it. And let's check occupations. All right. Let's look at occupation by group. What does it give us? In some communities, they call these YNs, right? 5% of blue collar workers based on the trends, other workers, whatever, but you don't see the same numbers compared to the Republican voters. But these brothers have a reason to vote. right? But these brothers could also be the same brothers who are voting against you to say, hey, I don't care about a sister being in office. I want lower cost of living. My rent is skyrocketed. The price of my insurance is skyrocketed. Everything that you would talk about, to me, you're not saying outside of student loans. I don't care about student loans. If they come get it, they come get it. If they don't, we're going to deal with it, right? However, there's a part of saying, what is your messaging when I'm seeing other people in my age group not relying on government to be who they are, to find their own audience, to build their own business? Whether it's B. Simone, Jesse Wu, or any other Black figurative woman in social media, they found their own lane, right? Where was their rely on government? Where was the policy to say, you know what? I needed this. Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, whoever, and say, hey, yeah, this is the policy that made me want to go vote for you. And guess what? The rest of y'all need to go do it too. And we've seen Plies do it, release a great rap song for what it needs to be. But there needs to be a deeper emphasis outside of a rap song. To be real, it's like, where is the economic development, or where are the job opportunities for this 18 to 40 or 18 to 49? Because this is the block of voters that you actually need that are showing up, actually. What did you say to them to make them want to believe in your campaign? Both sides of the aisle. And the issue is, you create this narrative that they're not voting, but they're voting higher, Republican and Democrat, then you're actually marketing and advertising. I think it's a slap in the face. And this is just brothers who didn't likely completed high school, right? But what are you saying to those voters? If you're not thinking about that from the aspect of, you know what, I'm coming in this community, we're going to have a barbershop conversation. It's going to be 12 o'clock on a Tuesday when everybody's at work. And the only people who can come in my community are the political jarheads who just want a photo op next to a bus, or a photo op with someone just to say, hey, I'm in the circle of what's going on this campaign cycle. Look at me and the surrogates, right? How is that driving the issue to that father of three going to the barbershop on Saturday, talking about, hey, yeah, Kamala Harris and her team were here on Tuesday. For what? Everybody's at work. You didn't want to hear what they had to say. If you cared what those YNs, those young brothers, those Black voters really wanted to hear from you, you wouldn't have went there and pitched a speech. You would have went there to go listen a year ago, 2 years ago, a decade ago. But all you get is the suits. So now all of a sudden, you're in a close race. You have 10,000, less than 10,000 votes in Georgia, a key swing state. And you want to talk about, how do they say, a Black man's plan. What is a Black man's plan in this economy? What are you even saying? Then you have these henchmen out here who just want to bash men and like, look, it's not on us again. If the Black men deflect, those YNs, those young brothers, if they deflect, there's still enough white women who will vote against Trump to outweigh that. So what's the excuse? If it's not on us, then why are you even pointing the finger over here? Because guess what? In Florida, we're showing up 2% points higher, damn near 40% in early voting, higher than, guess what? The average, overperforming. The Black male Republicans are voting higher than every female demographic in the entire state. You're not talking about that. In Georgia, We're seeing damn near the same thing. They're voting at 50%. And you have these young brothers out here that you want to talk to. Oh, you know what? Let's look at the young brothers, this age group. I'm gonna look at the Republicans. I didn't look at the Republicans. Let's look at the Black Republicans in Georgia by age. Guess who's showing up? The 30, the 40s, 7-8%. It's lower. It's lower than the average. But something's driving them to vote more than the people you want to talk to. But you're outpacing them. But what is your messaging to the masses, the MPAs and undecideds, that's going to say, hey, I need something to vote and believe in, because I don't even think I can afford to believe in what you're talking about. But let me get some water first again. But let me not get on a tangent too far than what I need to for this video. Let's go to North Carolina. I will add in South Carolina to this as well, because I didn't like the fact that MPAs didn't show up in Georgia. That is data. You got to work with it. ChatGPT doesn't solve everything. But this you would expect to be at least a little bit more there. But here we go. North Carolina. Is P.D. Pablo driving up the Republican voters in North Carolina, like the black male voters in Florida, the black Republican male voters in Florida, and the black male voters in Florida too, and the black male Georgians are turning up as well. Kirk Cousins got them boys turning up in a But let's look at North Carolina. We have let's look at North Carolina. We have roughly 42%, 3 million of 7.1 million registered voters who cast a ballot. There's not going to be a lot left on election day. I'm telling you that there's not going to be a lot of voters left on election day at this rate. That's a good and bad thing. It diversifies, again, the way we conduct elections. It changes the way we approach absentee and early voting. But at the end of the day, election day is election day. And they still know that there's a gap of what we need to show up. Right? So here we go. 42% early voting. North Carolina, I think, whatever is damn near set at 50%, it's got to be some low-hanging fruit. So 3 million votes cast early voting here. Let's look at the breakdown. Gender, 55% to 44. So similar to Georgia. We have a trend here, at least in Georgia and North Carolina. Something interesting, how many voters have changed parties within the last few years? About 1.5%, you would say, roughly. No calculator, just trying to, take an eye at it and see. But of people who voted, we have a very close race that Republicans are up by almost 30,000 votes. About 31,000, 32,000, roughly, a 1% vote advantage over the Democrats. And see the MPAs here. The MPAs will roughly come in around maybe 990, maybe close to 999, 99, right? So this is an even split with the MPAs, again, almost deciding everything. And that comes down to the major issues on the ballot. And I know the governor there, I think you had a black Republican guy there who could have made history, but I think he's going to have some deflectors. And those deflectors from the governor's race in North Carolina will be telling and say, okay, how do they vote for the presidential race? Like, you know what? Hey, I'm gonna vote for Trump, but I'm gonna vote for this Democrat for governor. But like, say, fuck it, I'm gonna just vote for 2 Democrats and see what happens, right? But there's good. It's gonna be a close race in North Carolina, right? So let's get out of people who change parties for now. Let's look at black men. Isn't that what we came here to look at, right? The broad ethnic groups, people who've cast ballots, 66% European, 2.2 million votes, roughly 3%, 4% Hispanic, 18% African American, roughly 500,000. I didn't say it before, roughly under 120,000 Hispanic voters or Portuguese descent voters in North Carolina. Some others and unknowns, around almost 9% are East and South Asian voters. 56,000 of them in the state of North Carolina have cast a ballot, right over 1.8% there. But we're looking at black voters. Likely African American voters, 18%. 38%. Now, last time Georgia, I want to say that was historically how they voted last time for black men, around 38%. So they're on par. Maybe a conversation needs to be had there. You know, if other states like Florida and Georgia are outperforming, that could be telling in a close race, right? But is it going to still be outweighed by those Republican voters who are going to deflect? Because they're already outpacing, again, for those 212 black men that were here, by European voters. If we would look at the ones who've cast ballots for what it is, those million women, if 100,000 of them deflected and voted for Kamala Harris, it would offset anything there. But realistically, by the base of 37, North Carolina is still voting above par, right? However, they're voting right where they typically do, which isn't a trend in Georgia and Florida, which says, hey, they're voting more. But we got to look at some other areas up the Eastern Seaboard, and maybe that'll be able to tell us, maybe unlock Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and see what we can do. So let's get into the voter share. These 3 million voters. Let's look at black voters here, black men by party. 38% overall by party. 80%, damn near 81% Democrat. Less than 10,000 black Republican voters in Georgia. 94,000 MPA, maybe round that up, 96,000. All that put together, you have more MPA voters in North Carolina that'll make a decision on this than the black Republicans. And they'll be most likely, even in a 60-40 split, going towards the Democrats, 40%, there'll be more Democratic voters voting for Kamala Harris. But when we look at the men, the 38%, what do we have? 212,000. 76% of those black male voters, 162,000 in North Carolina, have voted, outpacing them being the black male voters, 5,370. Now the MPA voters, 43%. 43,000, roughly 20% here. It'll be interesting to see what the MPAs do, what they care about. But for the Republicans here, are they voting more than the female voters in North Carolina? Yes, they are. The same trend in Florida. Something crazy here in all the data, everything that gets kind of boring in it. I told a friend of mine I felt like bench time because it's a lot of data, it's a lot of nerdy stuff that I just don't think a lot of people are interested. But if you are interested, please make sure you subscribe, like the channel. I am the Hip Hop Lobbyist. If it's your first time here, guess what? I'll make a video to explain who I am, so you can actually be like, hey, yeah, I actually kind of like this guy. But either way, join the community, tap in, because in North Carolina, we see that a trend is going on with Black Republican men. 54% of them, even though it's only 5,000 brothers combined, realistically, there are about 40,000 brothers, dedicated brothers, who are like, hey, Lost Tribe of Israel, I'm voting for Donald Trump, right? Those brothers are there. I completely understand those brothers. Let them have it, right? But it's not enough of these 5,000 brothers to make an impact on the election, right? Because even though this is a swing state, this trend of these Black brothers outpacing the sisters is this trend of Black Republican men outpacing female voters is really astonishing to me. Knowing that men overall are voting at, this is just correcting what I'm looking at. I'm looking at Republicans, of Republican voters, even of Republicans, right? $1,100 East Asian, 39%. The European voters, European ethnic group, let me move it up just in case. 48%, 49%. They're voting. Black Republican men in North Carolina and Florida are voting more than women. Black Republican men in North Carolina and Florida are voting more on average than women. These brothers have a lot to prove. And I don't know why. I just don't understand. I don't get it, because even amongst other and unknown races, ethnic groups, which could be individually broken down into people from these countries, or Native Americans, Arabs, Russians, Armenians, Ukrainians, Serbians, Persians. My apologies, I just didn't want to butcher it. Filipinos, Turkish, Croatians, like those are the other unknowns, right? Out of them who have voted, Black male Republicans are still outpacing them. Go back to it. Let me just, that's 49%. What I want to sit down with these brothers, because I'm not opposed to sitting down and talking to Thomas Sowell, but I want to understand, why are these minute, the margin of difference between 30,000 brothers? Why are you voting for Donald Trump more than any other woman in the world, right? There's something you have to prove. I want to see, okay, of these brothers, this 54%, let's see something. I want to see how many of you voters have changed parties recently. We're looking at maybe 15, 18%. 18% of those in the last 4 years, since Biden at least, have changed parties and say, you know what, bruh, whatever they talking about, I'm with. And those brothers have made the podcast. Those brothers could have started congregations. These brothers are out here perpetrating the narrative that, hey, if we put it out here long enough and have enough SEO around it, search engine optimization, the people will believe that for some reason, everybody, because we're a monolith, is doing the same. But by the numbers, it doesn't make sense, because you know why? I'm just Black, 5,000, 370 men. You know why? Because when I look at the masses, it's still Republicans, right? You know why? You know why? Because when I look at the masses, these 450,000 brothers in the state of Georgia, I'm sorry, these brothers in the state of North Carolina, 81%. I'm not buying it. Because what you see is these voters who've cast ballots. What you see is the other people who've left the party, but they've gone NPA. They've gone other places. We the people. Come on, man. Libertarian, green, constitutional. These brothers have decided, you know what? I'm so deep in my political journey. I'm not even Republican. I'm of the people. We the people. And we're not going to get deeper into that because I'm not trying to expose or look at anybody's personal information, right? So there's no campaign I'm running. So in North Carolina, we have an overall trend of Black Republican men of the 3 million voters. So it's 5,000 brothers are voting more than anything. But they're outpaced by roughly 500,000 other Black men who said, hey, F it. We don't even want to hear that noise. But y'all telling us that Black men are voting against Kamala Harris and vote for Donald Trump. It's not on us. Right. So what we see here is the good old state of Maryland. The roughly 4.2 million voters we have there of strong Democratic stronghold when you have going through the DC outskirts up to Baltimore and through the good old PG County for what it is. And I think this is good from where we were last time. So let's do a reset. All right, we have the good state of Maryland here, a good Democratic stronghold, and we're looking for, again, the individual breakdown of how Black men are voting. Because if you're telling me, again, Black men aren't voting at 37%, then that means that we're doing something wrong here, right? And that was a narrative, and that's what we started to push forward. But it also ends up being a point to say, hey, let's go back and look at the voter data and analyze these early voting trends to see, hey, how are men performing in key states and other states throughout the South? And I wanted to look at South Carolina, couldn't get their info, only had an overview of their voters, but for early voting info, I didn't feel that was necessary for this content. So we're going to look at the 24% of voters in election day state, most likely turn out here by the average of the one. We're going to look at the 1 million voters who have cast ballots already in the state of Maryland. Now that's roughly 24% of the voters in the state. But of those, they have so many parties here. 58% Democrat, 25% Republican, 14% NPA. There's not going to be a groundswell here, even of Black Republicans. If we highlight Black Republicans here, Republicans, ethnicity, broad ethnicities. The Republican breakdown, you have roughly less than 3,000 brothers. Check this out. You have less than 3,000 registered Black Republican brothers who cast ballots in Maryland already. And they're voting almost 24 points higher than the Black male turnout average. But for some reason, these 1,400 brothers, add them with the less than 10,000 brothers from Florida, the less than 15,000 brothers from Georgia, and however many brothers they had in North Carolina, right? These groundswell of brothers could have a good conference on why they vote more than anyone else, right? Because even though they're a smaller group of brothers collectively, right, that just in a think tank for themselves politically, the Byron Donalds of the world, Tim Scotts of the world, whatever it is, there, right? These brothers vote more than others. So I would want to really have a conversation with them to say, hey, what is it about voting that other communities don't get, right? I feel that learning their concept of the electoral process, and let me switch over here. I feel understanding their thought process on the electoral process, right, would help educate a lot of not only activists, but electoral groups that want to engage voters and educate voters on the key things they need to do. And I'm not talking about some, hey, yeah, you know, slavery and conservative values and Ronald Reagan. I mean, just the principle, right? Because it's not a fact of, again, you're not more educated. You don't have more educated brothers out of these maybe 35,000 brothers, right? You don't have more income comparatively to Democrats and others. You just have more of a different train of thought. And you're showing up higher than any other voter demographic that's out there, but you're a minute proportion of the entire operation, right? And I feel that you're the ones that are driving the podcast, again, driving the media narrative, driving everything that's saying, hey, Black men are voting against Kamala Harris because me and my conference of 30,000 Republican men came in a cohort to say, hey, if we say this enough, they'll believe it. Even though we know we're outnumbered. But even for those younger voters who are voting, who aren't voting, when you look at their turnout, that will really be the telling, say, okay, what messaging actually sticks? Because even among, let's kind of go back to it. Oh, add to the scene, go back, bomb. Even among these Black male voters, by age, ones who have cast ballots, they're older. 57% of them are older. You're still not engaging that base of 20 to 39 to turn out to vote, in Maryland at least, right? In a Democratic stronghold. But if that continues throughout, then it's like, okay, cool. That group thought dies off. But I guess whatever you're doing to drive, I'll switch back one more time. Oh, whatever you're doing to drive your base of voters up in Florida, Georgia, because they were down at 50%, North Carolina, Maryland, wherever. Whatever you're doing collectively, needs to be taught in a basis of the importance on elections, period. Because I don't feel your 5,000 votes, maybe 35,000 collectively, even if you give them some sway, 200,000 votes, right? I don't think your block understands the impact this election could have if we could understand why you were voting, period. Not your thought process on policy, not your thought process on Kamala Harris, not your thought process on Donald Trump, but what it is about voting that's so important that needs to be taught to the masses, because that's not being taught at all, right? People look at the data, they look at the numbers, they look at everything to kind of say, okay, this is how people are going to vote. But for your conference of Black Republican voters who are voting more than women, There needs to be a conversation. I'll open the conversation. Anyway, I appreciate y'all tapping in. I'll be doing more videos, of course. I wasn't able to do the live stream, had some personal stuff come up more than anything. I appreciate you tapping in. There it is. Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy, the HipHopLobbyist. And in today's video, I'll be breaking down Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Maryland early voting turnout numbers. And we'll really be astonished to see what Black men, Republican voters, are doing in all of those states. I mean, it's mind-baffling when you really think about it, right? Either way, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who's tapped into the channel so far. When I released the last video, we had roughly 41 subscribers. I really did appreciate, the people who helped build the base of this channel. But then I didn't expect 71 people to subscribe, and I was really humbled. So thank you for joining this community, a community that I think will build out to not only help understand policy, understand elections, understand, as we're doing right now, early voting turnout. But more than anything, I appreciate you tapping in. I like to do one edit, no recordings, but this time I had to move studios. It's been a long day, but I wanted to make sure I got this content to you. And we're going to do the amendments and some other things, but more than anything, let's get into the Florida content and early voting in general.